Welcome back to Documentary First, an inside look at a documentary filmmaker's journey. I'm your host, Jason Rugg, and joining us, as always, is our documentary filmmaker, Christian Taylor.
Hey there, Jason.
Good to see you, Christian. Glad to have you back.
Good to see you, too. So glad to be here. It's been a while. We haven't seen each other since May.
Yeah.
I've been gallivanting all over U.S. and Europe, and so I'm back in my home studio, as you can see, and very happy to be here with you today.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you back. And this is episode 200. We've done 200 of these.
200. I can't believe it. I had to do a little bit of research because I wanted to celebrate this moment. It's a big achievement, actually, for me, I think, for all of us here, to have 200 episodes under our belt. Our first episode was on March 15th, 2019. That was when it aired. That was over 4 years ago, actually. Yeah. And so hats off to you for sticking with me that long.
Yeah, the show has changed a bit since then. I mean, back then we used to record in person, and we used to record like 4 episodes at a time, and we would do like 15-minute episodes. They were super short, just real quick in and out. And we don't do that anymore.
No, we don't. Things have changed. In fact, so much has changed. You know, I was looking back at, originally in 2019, we were in a studio together. They were shorter. We were doing them, we were batching them. COVID happened, and, that changed everything. But also, a movie happened. So we started this before the movie even came out at all. Even the rough cut came out. And I was trying to figure this out because it came out in March. But in March, I was managing a huge crisis about what we were going to do with The Girl Who Wore Freedom. Because on February 19th, I will never forget it. Bill sent me like the first, 20 minutes or so of the film, and it sucked. And I was like, oh no, this is terrible. And I had to fly to Tennessee, and I thought I'd be there a week trying to figure it out, and ended up being there 6 weeks. And we were hoping we would just get, a solid beginning and a solid end and maybe 20 minutes in the middle. And by the time we were done, I had rewritten the whole thing, and we had 2 hours of material. Actually, it was 2.5 hours that we had to cut back before we took it to Normandy at the end of May. So I don't know why we thought we should launch a podcast in the middle of all of that, other than I remember saying that the things that were happening were just so unbelievable that I did not want to forget them. And I wanted to find some way to, to remember everything that we had been going through to kind of birth this baby.
Yeah. So. I still remember you, Josh, Sean, and I all having a meeting and talking about like what you could use the podcast for, how you could launch it, what you should call it. And I remember Sean just like throwing out like, you should call it Documentary First because it's your first documentary.
I remember that exact moment also. And, we didn't even think more beyond that. I was like, okay, sounds good to me.
Yeah,
and
cool.
The podcast title was born. So thank you, Sean, for that.
Which is now like the title of your whole company,
it's
right?
It's now the title of my whole company. Yeah. Because the podcast has continued on. We do have a lot of listeners kind of all over the place. In fact, one woman wrote me recently. She discovered the podcast because we met at a film festival, and it's become extremely useful to her. She said she's learned a lot. Oh. She's enjoyed it. She said she just got to the music cue sheet episode and learned so much. So, Gail, I just want to say thank you so much for listening to the podcast, and I'm so happy that it can be useful to you. Please pass the podcast along to other people you think might be interested. And that goes for everybody. Share the podcast with people. We're still trying to grow our audience, but it's nice to know that experienced filmmakers can still find some useful stuff in our podcast.
Yeah, I feel like that's the really great thing about just how open you've been for this podcast is a lot of people like wouldn't want to admit that they didn't know something. Whereas this whole podcast is just going, I learned something new. And that's
or
so
hey,
cool.
This was a really bad idea. You really shouldn't do this.
This cost us a lot of time and money. Don't do that.
You know what I think is fascinating, because now recently we've been bringing on other filmmakers to hear their journey, their stories. Every time I talk to a filmmaker, everybody's experience is different. There are some general, givens, like it is impossible to raise money. Like I've never met a filmmaker that said, "Oh yeah, I had all the money I needed. It was great. Man, I had more money than I needed. I really should have done more." I've never had that experience. In independent filmmaking, that fundraising piece is a given. And I just think when I talk to them, however, all of their challenges or all of their positive things that happen, they're all different. You cannot write one single rule book for any one person's film. They're going to be as unique as the films themselves. So that's a rule I definitely, have discovered. And so if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to listen to this podcast and, I'll just figure out exactly what I need to do and follow this set of rules. And this is the wrong podcast for you, because I'm here to tell you there are no rules, and my experience is not going to be like anyone else's. There may be things you can learn, but your experience is going to be unique to you.
Well, you also definitely had the additional complication of trying to find volunteers, and also we have to fly people across the world, and there's just a lot of complicated things there. I was going to say, I don't remember if we ever talked about this, but I think one of the key things about being a filmmaker, people talk about this all the time, is basically being an improviser. Going, well, we have this and this, let's put those together and make this. And that's really the filmmaking process. Every step of the way from pre to post is just going, okay, well, we have this much money, we have these people in this place. So what can we do with that? And how can we make that the best it can be? And then you actually get your footage and you go, oh, we missed this. Well, how do we edit that together? We're missing this shot and everything. It's improvising, and just, MacGyvering everything.
So true.
That's what I think is so encouraging about this podcast is over the 4 years, you've really just talked a lot about how you've had to MacGyver everything and are open about, taping this to that and, just scrounging anything you can.
Well, and I hope that will be, continue to be useful to people over time. I know for sure when I heard Ken Burns say on the masterclass that I watched about how to make a documentary that a filmmaker is really a problem solver. You have to solve a million problems, and that is your job. He was right. He was absolutely right. You as a producer or a filmmaker are in the business of solving problems and finding a way when there seemingly is not a way. And oftentimes the story of making the movie is almost as fascinating as the movie itself, if not sometimes more.
Yeah. That's why so many people love behind the scenes content or director's commentary or, stuff like this. I mean, when Barry was coming out on HBO, it's one of my favorite shows. Every week they did a podcast where they break down what they did that week. The Bill Hader would sit down and talk about, when we were writing it, this is what we were thinking. When I was directing it, this is what I was thinking. Realized that didn't work. We had to cut that out and change it. And it's just so fascinating. I'm almost as excited to listen to the behind the scenes as I am to watch the actual episode. Yeah. And it's just the story of making something is just so complex. And you think of when we started this podcast, you didn't have a finished movie at all, not even close. Nope. And now you have one finished feature that's seen distribution and gone all over the place. And now you have another short that's finished. And you're working on a series, and you're working on another short, and I don't even know how many projects you have at this point. But in the last 4 years, it's gone from no completed project to 2 completed projects and a bunch more in the works. Yeah, it's so cool.
Been a crazy journey, and it's really interesting. I just got back from 4 weeks in Europe, and actually before that, I was in Tennessee recording 9 interviews for our next film, Heroes of Carentan. And after I filmed that, I went to Atlanta, took a flight to Normandy, and was in Europe until a day and a half ago. And I have been thinking a lot during this time about where I am right now in comparison to where I was 4 years ago. And what's interesting is that this next project, The Heroes of Carentan, is much bigger in a sense than what I've done in the past, or it feels like a much bigger hurdle because, and here's why. Now I know what is coming. Now I know what the potential problems are. Now I know how much things are going to cost. Now I know what the problems are with distribution. Like there was something so great about knowing nothing, like having absolutely no expectations, Now there are expectations. I can make a movie now. I do know somewhat what I'm doing and I know how the process works. And not only that, I am trying to gain that to figure out how I can actually, this movie can make money as opposed to just being something that, the world sees. But the barriers now feel so much higher. And I think it has to be just because I know what the barriers are. I know how hard they are. It's just not as easy as it was before. And the world has changed. Like the world has changed. I was thinking about, all the way we were gaming things in the very beginning to raise money, to get people to see the film, the process by which we would find distribution. All of that's changed now because that was all pre-COVID. And so now we're in this new place of trying to figure out how to build an audience, how to advertise for a film, how to tailor our film so that outlets will be interested in purchasing it. I mean, just everything's different and the tools are different. Technology is different. I'm just blown away at how much has changed in 4 years.
Yeah, AI wasn't even a thought on the horizon. And now it's like, tomorrow someone's going to release some plugin that can edit your rough cut from your script, without even thinking about it. And then you can just go in and tweak it.
I know. Yeah.
It's
so much has changed and so much has stayed the same. Yeah. And that is that it is still extremely difficult for independent filmmakers to make a film, to pay for the film, to find a place to put up the film so that people can see it. All of those things have always been problems before for independent filmmakers. And they're going to be the same problems going forward for independent filmmakers. And the question is, do we have what it takes to see things through the end? I experienced a lot of adversity when I was over in Normandy this time. It was really a rough trip. And a lot of it was that some unexpected things happened where I felt very betrayed. And then I also had a foot surgery that went awry. So I've got 2 broken screws now and a foot that was just repaired. And I was in a lot of pain the whole time. So it was a challenging trip to Normandy. And a friend, Jake Schroeder of Denver Police Activities League, who runs an educational seminar called D-Day Leadership Seminar, where he brings people to D-Day, teaches leadership skills using World War II as and the soldiers as examples. So he gave me a book called The Obstacle is the Way, The Art of Turning Adversity into Advantage while I was over there. And I have been reading it, and I think it's a fabulous recommendation for any filmmaker because you are going to run into some incredible adversity. And the question is, how are you going to use that to your advantage? And one of the biggest tenets of that is, there's a few of them, and one of them talks about seeing things with a different perspective. Every single thing that you encounter when it's a challenge can be turned on its head, and you can see the benefit that could come out of it if you're only willing to do that. And I was able to do that in The Girl Who Wore Freedom kind of naturally. I don't know why. I always say the film was a miracle of God. I do feel like there is some sort of divine element that was happening at the time. I've been struggling doing that more this time. I just see a lot of the obstacles, and I feel a little bit more defeated in a way, and I'm not quite sure why. Given the experience that we have with The Girl Who Wore Freedom or the success there. So the lesson there, I think that people can take away, Jason, is that you may have done something and been successful at something, and you may think, okay, great, now I'm going to charge up this hill. Well, those demons that you felt back then of I'm not enough, I'm not going to be able to get this done, I'll never be able to raise this money, this project is too hard, those are not going to go away. Whether it's your first film, and I've actually heard more experienced filmmakers say this, whether it's your 10th film, those insecurities, doubts, and fears that you have with film number 1 are still going to be there, I think, at film number 10. They may be lessened, but they're still going to be there. So the question is, are you going to press on? Because I also remember Ken Burns saying that is the difference between a filmmaker that makes a film and everybody else is, are you going to keep keeping on? And the answer has got to be yes, if you want to have a film at the end of the day.
Yeah. It's, I think we've talked about the best piece of advice I've ever gotten was finish it. Mm-hmm. Always finish it. Because if you finish the film, then you're a filmmaker. If you give up halfway, you're not a filmmaker.
and I think you can get so overwhelmed with all of the tasks that you just melt down. I was telling the story to somebody today that when I was a young mom and I had these 4 boys that were changing clothes 15 times a day because they were wet or muddy or lost, I would walk into the kitchen the next morning and go into the laundry room, and there would be this gigantic mountain of clothes just sitting there staring at me, waiting to be done. And I would just turn around and walk right out. Like it was just too much, couldn't do it. And one time I had a friend come over and just talk to me and just say, pick up a few pieces and throw them in the wash. Just get started. Don't stand there looking at the mountain. Just get started. And as that person and I were hanging out and we're talking, the laundry was starting to get done. And I do think that, the kernels of good advice there are just do the next thing, one thing at a time, and take somebody along that you like hanging out with you. Because they can make the work so much easier. And Jason, that's for sure true with me and this podcast. You've been a faithful friend and co-host from the beginning. I'm so thankful. You're in a different place from where we first started, right? I mean, you were 4 years younger, had less experience. You were working, with a team of people basically as their.
Yeah, I was basically like doing everything below directing animated TV and editing podcasts. And now I'm pursuing being a voice actor, like someone else I know, who's given me some encouragement and some help.
And you're doing a great job.
And the pandemic really changed that. I mean, the animation studio just kind of shattered. It was probably going to end anyway, but all the funding dried up. So it's just like, that's gone. And but then you started animating your own stuff. I mean, it gave you an opportunity. Again, that's the obstacle, right? Yep.
The obstacle is funding dried up. Animation studio went away. You're now on your own in your basement,
and make your own.
So, you're going to make your own. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
we had a lot of fun with that. And, now we're off. Sean and I officially last week completed draft 1 of our first feature film, script, which was awesome and terrifying because it's like, there are parts of this that are not good. And so, it's definitely been a very interesting journey. And, careers have ups and downs, creativity has ups and downs, and it's been a lot in the last 4 years. I mean, I think COVID just really threw everyone for a loop on everything, but creatives, I think it really hit us the hardest because it's like a lot of the times you need a little bit of optimism to be able to create. And I remember you trying to figure out okay, can I shoot a documentary over Zoom? Can I, because I think about it now, we were talking about how production changed during that time. And it's like, I watch the news sometimes and they still will go to a Zoom interview with somebody. And it's just like that never used to happen pre-COVID. No. Our standards have just been lowered to the point where it's like, it's fine. It's whatever.
I was thinking about that whole standards thing, and it started with YouTube, right? Because everybody became accustomed to just watching shot crappily, but it was a story and people didn't care. They just enjoyed the story or the content or the moment or whatever.
Yeah.
And that sort of lowered the bar in terms of what we're willing to watch and enjoy. But recently I was thinking about that in regards to these little reels that we see on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok, because you'll see them. It's a reel for an advertisement or something, and it'll be the same woman's computer AI voice. And she's doing every like thing.
Yeah.
And we listen to that. And obviously people are using it because it works.
Yeah.
So now we don't even need a real voiceover to connect with us anymore. It's just, we're just using the voice to get information across. That's terrible.
It's really weird. TikTok and reels and all that, like I don't know. Christian, when was the last time you just like spent an hour on TikTok or Instagram or anything like that?
I can't. I can do about 2 minutes maybe. Yeah.
I spent about an hour scrolling through TikTok the other day, and I just felt terrible after. Like my brain felt like mush. I felt super tired. I felt like not necessarily imposter syndrome, but it's just like a stream of disconnected content changing every couple seconds or minutes is just not good for your brain, I don't think. And yeah, I just deleted TikTok off my phone. I was just like, I don't need this or want this. It's just not, I don't know. It's not a good experience. It feels like you're just eating empty calories. It's pretty much what it is.
What's interesting, I've actually been watching other people consume TikTok and Insta Reels, and because I am really curious about, the people that are like eating it up, because it is being eaten up. And what I have been watching is that is when people are falling asleep, when they're waking up in the morning, when they're eating their cereal, when they're on a bus or a train, when they're, bored somewhere, they just will watch TikTok. And I did kind of lie. I can get sucked in. There are times where I've gotten sucked into some content, and before I know it, more time has passed than I would like to admit. Yeah. Because it does numb your brain in a weird sense. It numbs your brain. It can put you to sleep. And I think people are using it for that. And go ahead.
I was going to say, I have a friend who told me that his counselor, it says that, consuming content like that, looking at Instagram, looking at, TikTok, all that sort of thing, what you're really doing is, I've started to feel for a moment. Let's just get rid of that. And you're just not letting your body or your mind or your soul feel. It's if I just look at my phone, my little rectangle here, it'll keep me happy, and I just don't have to think about how I feel about myself, how I feel about the world, how I feel about whatever, and I'll just consume some mindless content. And so it's become this addiction that people have to not feel anymore.
Yeah, and that makes sense.
And that's what film is it's designed to make you feel. And so you have the content version of art that is not in fact art, that doesn't make you feel. It might make you laugh for a quick minute or whatever, but you're not gonna stop for 5 minutes and stare at a piece, a TikTok, and go, wow, I feel changed by that. But if you walk through the art gallery, the Art Institute in Chicago, and you stare at Nighthawks for 5 minutes, you'll feel different when you walk away. And that's a weird thing.
Yeah. And it's interesting, here we are in this film business where if you want to raise an audience or draw attention to your film, the only way for you to advertise is to social media, through social media. And you have to figure out how to communicate with that audience and how to get them to care about whatever your product is that you're putting out. So in a sense, you do have to make a deal with the devil that you may not really think is good for people, right?
Yeah.
I don't like that, but it's true.
Yeah, it's like you have to keep the two separate parts of your brain of like, this is content versus this is art, and have the film be art and have the content be the thing that drives people to ideally engage with the art in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
And that's weird.
That's I think the tragedy right now for independent filmmakers is that if your film does not get picked up by a Netflix or an Amazon Prime or an Apple TV, it's just part of their subscription package. If they're not paying you for that content and you're having to, go the TVOD route or the AVOD route, there is no way for anyone to find out about your film unless it's word of mouth or social media, because there's just nowhere else to advertise for it. Now, like Joe Amodei has said before when he's been on here, they will include, they will include your film as part of their pitch to be included on the Memorial Day weekend sales on Amazon Prime or whatever. But there really is no guarantee that that's going to happen or that there is going to be, any sort of net effect from that. And so that means that we have to market our own films. Like most distributors these days are not going to advertise for you. You, the filmmaker, are going to have to do your own advertising, and that is going to have to be through your own social media channels or partnering with an influencer or buying ad time. Just the way it goes.
Which I think there's a really interesting bit of film history that happened in the movie God's Not Dead. Have we ever talked about how they marketed that film?
No, please go on.
So Ash Grayson is a brilliant marketer, and they brought him in on the film, and he was like, all right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to get people from Duck Dynasty in it. And he just went through and got all these relatively famous people who were also Christian to be in the film. Because he's like, that's who you want to draw. You want to get the people who already have this audience captured. And part of their contracts was, we want to have them post about it on Facebook. We want to have them, so he was casting people in the film that would also help promote it. And then at the end of the film, they also had people text your friends, God's Not Dead. They put that in the credits. Hey, if you see that, text all your friends and say God's Not Dead. And I cannot tell you how many texts I got from people who were from youth group or whatever at the time, because I was in high school at the time. I got texts from that of just text somebody, God's Not Dead. And so that really just became this kind of way of casting things. I mean, nowadays, if you go to cast a film, one of the main things people actually pay attention to is all right, not so much can they act, not so much are they good at, are they a good fit for the role? What's their social following like? Is that the demographic we want for this film? That sort of thing. And so you kind of, how do you do that in a documentary where you're not casting people necessarily? So, that's kind of a whole piece of it that's kind of ripped out. You don't really have that part of, you can't cast somebody in your documentary because then it isn't a documentary. Right. So
now I will tell you, interestingly enough, we did take that into consideration in Heroes of Carentan. So
interesting. Okay.
Yeah. We'll see how it works. But so one of the things that happened for me this time with Heroes of Carentan is I was able to, because of The Girl Who Wore Freedom, meet General JP McGee, who was the commanding general of the 101st Airborne Division. He is right now, actually, but I think he's changing out. I met him in Normandy last year. He was captivated. He saw the film on the plane. He was captivated by the film. And he basically introduced me to the public affairs officer at the 101st Airborne, Danny Matthews. And we started talking about the possibility of interviewing soldiers, currently serving soldiers at the 101st Airborne Division. And we also started talking about how we could partner with the 101st Airborne Division to market The Girl Who Wore Freedom. The 101st Airborne Division Instagram alone, let me look up real quick while I'm here. They have 55,000 followers, right? And so what he basically said was, you do stuff that focuses on our history or our people, we'll collaborate with you. And when we have done that, it's been remarkable. I mean, you can look at our Instagram page, top 2 videos that we've pinned have gotten, 19,000, 23,000 views because they collaborated with us. And most of those were non-followers. And in the course of that, he also introduced me to some other social media influencers that happen to work for the 101st Airborne Division in the Army. And the, influencing stuff is stuff they do on the side. A couple of those people I thought would make great interviews in our film. And I was mindful of the fact that if they are in our film, they do have an audience. Now, we didn't make them sign contracts saying that they would share that.
Right.
But I feel they support what we're doing and they believe in the importance of the stories we're telling. So I have a reason to believe they will share that once it's time. But we're trying to learn. And we're trying to innovate. And I do think the reason that I wanted to interview these currently serving soldiers is I am trying to figure out how to bring the past into the present and to be more interesting to today's, generation, kind of the younger generation, right? Because our distributor told us not a lot of these outlets are interested in World War II stories. It's just not a big audience. Okay.
Right.
Well, let's figure out then, how are we going to get today's audience interested in the story we have to tell? And right now we've retooled our film, and we've decided after these interviews that I did about 6 weeks ago, they were incredibly powerful, Jason. I mean, super powerful. We have, 9 guys at the 101st Airborne Division in leadership positions. They're mirrors of the heroes in 1944 that we want to be talking about. And they are talking about how these soldiers in 1944 were their heroes. And they can talk about understanding these 1944 heroes in the context of their own work. They fought in Iraq, Afghanistan, and now they're on the border of Ukraine, and they have been deployed. They have lost friends. They have experienced combat, and they have walked through very similar experiences as these heroes did in liberating the town of Carentan. Yeah. And for me, hearing their stories brought the past into the present, made it feel very relevant for today. And I think humanized the stories, from 1944. So we still, Zach and I have been working on rewatching these interviews and trying to figure out how to piece everything together. But the fact that the 101st is on the doorstep of Ukraine in Europe for the first time since 1945, it's a real big deal. I mean, we talked to General McGee, and I had him cover Max Taylor, who was the general of the 101st Airborne Division in 1944. And he talked about how his father studied under Max Taylor at West Point, and how they called West Point the 101 Ranch because he put all of his buddies from the 101st as instructors there. And so JP McGee grew up listening to stories about Max Taylor, and now here he is, the first 101st general in Europe since Max Taylor left.
Wow.
Like, that was a powerful experience for him, right?
Incredibly.
So it was just, I think it's going to be, there's just beautiful synergy there between the past and the present. And listening to these guys be very vulnerable and open about the cost of combat and how it changes them, and how the heroes that walk before them inspire them and keep them going. I think it's going to feel very relevant for today. So I do feel like we've learned a lot of lessons from The Girl Who Wore Freedom. I hope that we are making some changes in order to adjust to this new landscape of entertainment. And I do hope that what we can keep are the powerful impacts that the film will have, just like The Girl Who Wore Freedom has had and continues to have on people's lives, because that's really why we do this. It's why I do this anyway, is to really change people, Yeah.
I think your heart really comes through in just everything you do. I mean, The Girl Who Wore Freedom started out with, let me tell you this story about how my life was completely changed by going over to France once.
Yeah.
And bringing people along for that journey and changing their hearts. And then, that this podcast is pretty much that same sort of thing. It's just like, here's how that experience of making that film has changed me, and let me share that. And that's cool and vulnerable and not something that all that many people are willing to do. And yeah, I think I'm so excited to see what comes next for you, for this podcast, for all your projects. And yeah, I mean, is there anything else you want to talk about in this show? I feel like we've covered a lot of the things we'd kind of talked about that we wanted to talk about. I
appreciate that, Jason. It's very encouraging. I just want to tell anyone who's listening, I don't know where you are in your filmmaking journey, but if you're listening to this, you are trying to learn something, or you need some sort of word of encouragement. So I'm going to try to give you that right now. It's exactly what I said in the beginning of this podcast. Do not quit. Whatever you are facing right now, whether it's lack of funds, whether it's lack of access, whether it's people quitting, whether it's people treating you badly on your crew or your team, whether it's, messed up footage, bad sound, whatever it is that you are facing, it can be overcome. And trying to solve that problem, go around that obstacle or dig underneath it, is going to make you a better filmmaker. And once you get to the other side, you will see how you've grown. You will feel proud of yourself, and you'll want to do it again. So just don't give up. Don't give up. That's my word of advice.
Well, awesome. I guess, do you want to wrap up? Is there anything else you want to talk about in episode 200? The big 200?
Well, one thing we added over the course of time is our little segment, DocuView Deja Vu. And so now it is time for DocuView Deja Vu. Jason, I didn't even ask you if you wanted to bring something to this episode because you're not a documentary film lover, ironically.
I watched one just a couple weeks ago.
You're kidding.
Yeah.
Look at that. How about that? What did you watch?
Still a Michael J. Fox film, which is...
Really? I was curious about that.
It was sad, but really, really fascinating.
Really?
Yeah, my whole life, I feel like Michael J. Fox has had Parkinson's. Like, I don't remember it being announced. I don't remember anything like that. And I did not realize that he kept his diagnosis hidden for like a decade.
Wow.
And it was a fascinating journey to watch. They licensed a ton of footage from other, which, by the way, the documentary is about Michael J. Fox's journey into his career and then diagnosis with Parkinson's and how he dealt with it. And so he hid his diagnosis and still acted, and he was like, yeah, so my left hand would be tremoring, so what I did is I always had it like buried in a pocket, or I was putting on my watch, or I was straightening my tie or whatever. And they showed footage from movies and shows that he was doing at that time where he was masking his symptoms, and the only reason he ever announced it was because he couldn't mask it anymore. It got to the point where he was like, all right, this is, people are gonna figure it out, so here you go. And he announced it. And yeah, wow. It's really sad, really well done, really interesting, and just so heartbreaking to hear, because he really, went through such an emotional journey from realizing he had it to the slow onset of watching it come in. So yeah, highly recommend it. It's on Apple Plus. If you are a big fan of Back to the Future or anything Michael J. Fox, it's a good one. It's not exactly heartwarming, but it's also, there's hope in it. There's hope.
That's good. I love hope.
Yep.
Well, that's much better than the one I watched. Uh-oh. So I don't necessarily know if I'm going to recommend this one or not. I think people are going to have to decide for themselves. I did watch it on the plane, and I don't know. I was curious. I thought, I'm not going to like this. Anyway, I kept watching it. Why? I don't know. But it is called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Okay.
Except there is a little asterisk for the U. And this is by Nathan Price is the director. The writer is Tom Blackwell and Matthew Metcalf. This was originally a book that
I was going to say, I thought it was a book.
I guess they decided to turn it into a movie. But as a movie, basically, it's just this guy telling his story about how he, was a jerk and he got hurt and he hurt a lot of other people. And so what he learned along the way is just not to give not to give a care about anything. And he basically sits at a table and he tells his life story. And they show found footage of just, all sorts of different stuff. And, he talks about how it's not a self-help book and self-help books aren't useful. And really the whole thing is all about, self-help stuff. And it's really based on his experience. Like it's not any scientific anything. It's just basically his lessons. And what's funny is now, and ironic that I'm saying that basically is what this podcast is. I'm not an expert either, and here I am telling you what not to do. But it's also not a documentary. So, I mean, interestingly enough, some of the concepts went along very well with the Obstacle is the Way book by Ryan Holiday. But I just think The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday was a much more useful book and was probably a better use of my time than that movie. Anyway, check it out. See what you think. It could be just exactly what you need to not care what other people think and to try to, get shit done. So
did you like it or did you not like it? I can't really tell.
Well, it's you can only rent or buy it for $5.89 on Prime Video. Otherwise, you can watch it. I was flying on United, so I know it's on United.
I didn't realize it was such a new documentary because I was looking at it. It was like it came out this year.
Yeah, it came out this year. So I probably wouldn't spend the $5.99. I would probably say yes if you're on the plane. Check it out because you don't lose anything if you don't finish watching it if you don't like it. I will say I did watch A Man Called Otto on the plane as well on my ride home, and it was a much better use of my time. It was a phenomenal movie that was not necessarily what I expected, super moving and very thought-provoking. So
I've heard very mixed things about that movie.
Have you really?
Either you love it or you absolutely hate it. And I'm glad to hear that you like it.
Yeah, I was in the love category.
Wondering if I should check it out.
All right. Well, everybody, we're going to wrap it up. We do have some new filmmakers coming in to talk about their films and their challenges. So keep listening to Documentary First. In the next few weeks, we're going to keep working on our outline. And now we've got to come up with a new synopsis and a new log line. So we're going to be working on that stuff for Heroes of Keraton, as well as trying to raise money to finish the film. So that's what's going to be happening here at Documentary First.
I'm so excited to come along on this journey. Well, all right. Thanks, everyone, for listening to Documentary First, where we believe everyone has a story to tell, and you can be the one to tell it.
Yes, you can. Bye, everybody.